AITA for refusing to help my wife and her lover after they became homeless. My wife, Amy, 27, and I, 28, have been married for 6 years. They've been 6 good years of marriage, all things considered. I absolutely adored this woman and always saw her as a kind person with a big heart. I'm a somewhat cynical and reserved guy, so when I met her, she was like a ray of sunshine, and I knew I had to marry her. Unfortunately, that wasn't who she really was, or something changed over time. Sometimes you just don't know why things change. To be honest, one of the things I loved most about her was her passion for helping the community. She was the type who was always involved in community activities. She'd organize fundraisers with the local elementary school. Even though we didn't have kids, when the neighborhood church needed help with a bake sale, she'd fire up the oven and start baking peanut butter cookies. I respected her dedication and always supported her charitable activities. I never imagined that would be the very thing I'd end up hating most about her. It all started when she told me she wanted to volunteer at a soup kitchen downtown. She was quite excited about helping out folks down on their luck. I understood it was important work, but personally, I didn't get how that could excite her so much. Still, it meant a lot to her, so I supported her. On her first day of volunteering, she left in the afternoon and came back around 6 p.m. Everything seemed normal. She had lots of funny stories about the people she'd met and worked with. I listened and tried to share her enthusiasm. I was glad she was doing something that made her feel fulfilled. She even asked if I wanted to go with her next time. I declined the invitation. I wouldn't enjoy it half as much as she did and would just ruin the vibe. But over time, things started to change. She only went to the soup kitchen twice a week, but she stayed longer and longer each time. Eventually, she started coming home at 8 p.m. She always had an excuse ready when I asked. Sometimes there was a big mess that needed cleaning up. Another time, one of the clients started a fight and caused a commotion that took a while to sort out. She always had a story that made perfect sense. I didn't want to seem paranoid by pressing her too much, but something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore when I noticed her behavior at home was changing too. Suddenly, she guarded her phone like it was Fort Knox. She always had it in her hand and would tilt it slightly so I couldn't see the screen. I knew I had to do something the day I was looking for something under the couch and asked her to hand me her phone. I just wanted to use the flashlight to help me look. Instead, she said her phone battery was low and ran off to get mine. When she came back with my phone, I watched her carefully. Then she was typing on her phone for almost an hour before putting it on to charge. Obviously, the battery wasn't low. Once I realized that, it became obvious what was happening. She was spending more and more time away from home. She was so protective of her phone, she wouldn't even let me use the flashlight. She was having an affair. I was convinced. The only question was, who was she sleeping with? I tried to figure out the best way to approach the situation. The most direct method to find out what was going on was to check her phone, but I can't stress enough how protective she was of it. It was never more than a few feet away from her. She even took it to the bathroom. I thought about confronting her directly, but I knew she would just lie, and then she'd be more careful, and I'd have no chance of finding out the truth. I knew I had to be smart, so I decided to follow her the next time she went to her volunteer work to see where she was really going. After 3 painful days of waiting and pretending everything was fine, I finally got my chance. She told me she was heading out to volunteer, and I just replied that I'd see her later. I tried to act natural, but my heart was pounding. I was worried she'd spot me following her, but what really terrified me was what I might find. I went outside, pretending to wave goodbye, and started the car as soon as she left. Following her was tricky, but not as difficult as I had imagined. Honestly, the hardest part was controlling my own nerves. She had never been good at recognizing cars, so she probably wouldn't have even noticed if I was right behind her. My heart sank when I noticed we weren't heading towards the soup kitchen. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I was making excuses for her left and right. Maybe she had to pick something up for that day's work. Volunteering wasn't just handing out food. Some people had to do shopping or run errands. Maybe that was her role that day. Unfortunately, that wasn't it. In fact, I felt like I was going to have an anxiety attack when she pulled into a motel parking lot. I parked across the street and started recording with my phone immediately. The zoom made the images quite blurry, but it was still enough to see it was her. She didn't even go to the front desk. She went straight to one of the doors and knocked. A few seconds later, someone opened it for her. I was too far away to tell if I recognized him. and he was only visible for a few seconds before she went inside, and he closed the door. I felt completely numb. I sat there for a few seconds, phone still recording, and then the shock turned into anger. There was no doubt about what I had just seen. She was pretending to volunteer to cover up her affair, and she was doing it at this cheap motel. At that moment, I felt true disgust. I no longer had any idea how many of her charitable acts had just been excuses to cheat on me. I debated what to do for a while. I had the video. I could go home and do things by the book, talk to a lawyer, confront her when she got back, and kick her out of the house. But I knew she would lie to me. She'd probably tell me it was part of her volunteer work. Maybe she was giving someone emotional support. I'd had enough of her lies. So, I got out of the car and went straight to the door I'd seen her enter. I stormed across the parking lot, getting angrier with every step. By the time I reached the door, I was furious. I pounded on it so hard I felt like I was going to rip it off its hinges. I probably could have if I really tried. I don't think I've ever been that angry in my life. At first, there was some noise coming from the room, but everything went silent as soon as I knocked. I knew I wasn't mistaken. They were both in there, and they had been quite physically active until a few seconds ago. I banged on the door again. This time I yelled Amy's name and said I knew she was in there and I wanted to talk to her. Nothing. Again. By this point, I was making a full-blown scene. A few people peeked their heads out of nearby doors to see what was going on. The front desk clerk must have heard and came out to ask me to stop. I remember yelling that my wife was in there. The clerk was young, probably between 18 and 22. She looked scared and told me she'd have to call the police if I didn't calm down. I didn't stop for a second, and I started considering my options. I could keep banging on the door, and they'd pretend they weren't there. Then I'd have to deal with the police. Or I could go back home, and when she returned, I'd do my best to pretend this never happened. I stood there thinking for a while, as the clerk watched me with a worried expression. I realized she probably thought I was unpredictable, and the police would think so too. I took a couple of deep breaths to calm down and decided that a cheating wife wasn't worth getting arrested over. I apologized to the girl and told her I'd leave. Then I crossed the street and went back to my car. While I was in the car, for a moment I thought I didn't have to leave. Eventually, the two of them would have to leave the room and be caught by her husband. Probably not a good plan to keep the mood. I had a feeling they wouldn't take long to come out. So, I started the car and drove off as if I were leaving, so they'd think I wasn't watching them anymore, in case they were looking out the window. But I didn't leave. I waited 2 minutes. Then I circled the block and parked on a street further down from the motel. From there, I had a good view to see them leave without them seeing me. So I waited. Maybe I was wrong about killing the mood. Or maybe they wanted to be absolutely sure I was gone, because it was almost 3 hours before I finally saw Amy heading towards her car. She was practically running and looking in all directions. She looked terrified. I had obviously scared her by banging on the door. I put my car in drive and sped up to park right next to hers. She got into her car as soon as she saw me. I got out of mine. By then, I had calmed down a bit. I was still furious, but I was calm enough not to make another scene. I stood in front of her car, blocking her door so she couldn't get out. I asked her if this was what she always did when she went out to volunteer. She didn't answer. That's when I noticed her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying. I still wasn't. I asked her who the guy was, and she just said I wouldn't know him. She told me she was very sorry and that she hated that I had found out this way. I asked her how she planned for me to find out, but she had no answer for that. I told her I couldn't believe she had done this. All this time I thought she was some kind of saint. I used to brag to my friends about how involved she was in volunteer work, but all that time she just used it as a cover to sleep with someone else. That really got to her. She told me her volunteer work was real and that she had met him while volunteering. She wasn't a total liar. I found it ironic, considering we were standing in front of the motel where she had come to meet her lover, and her real concern was that I had implied she was a liar. I asked her if she wanted a medal for not being a complete piece of trash. That's when it turned into a real shouting match, and we were interrupted by the last person I expected to see. Her lover, the same guy who had opened the motel room door. He came out, stood next to her, and said, "I'm going to need you to stop bothering her." I was so shocked that for a moment I couldn't speak. First of all, the audacity would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. Second, the guy did not look like he was doing well at all. He was wearing a tattered coat. He looked like someone who had seen better days. When my wife said she'd met him while volunteering, I assumed she meant he was also a volunteer, but I was pretty sure the man in front of me was more the type to be in line for food, not handing it out. Seeing that made me snap inside. I'm not trying to sound classist or anything, but you'd assume if your partner cheats on you, it would at least be with someone who's an upgrade, not such an obvious step down. I couldn't believe my wife had destroyed our marriage for someone who probably didn't even have a place to live. It baffled me. I looked him up and down, completely speechless. He looked like someone who hadn't held a job in months, if not longer. I turned to Amy, incredulous, and asked if she had really left our marriage for this. She just told me I couldn't understand, that he had a good heart, and they had been drawn to each other. I told her to think about keeping that motel room a little longer because she wasn't coming home that night. That's what broke her. She begged me not to kick her out because she had nowhere to go. I replied that was something she should have thought about before she started sleeping with someone who was homeless. I told her I had a video of them together, solid proof of her infidelity, and that I would be filing for divorce soon. She kept begging me to let her stay at home. She didn't say a word about the divorce. She was just worried she wouldn't have a place to stay. I told her she could come pick up her things, but she wasn't sleeping another night in our house. I got in my car and went home. The first thing I did was pack all her stuff, everything that belonged to her, in a neat pile in the living room. After that, I started looking for a lawyer. I wasn't going to waste another minute on her. And, sure enough, she came back for her things that same night. She begged me to forgive her, to give her another chance. She told me we hadn't even talked about everything before I decided to divorce her. I replied that she'd had plenty of opportunities to talk, if that's what she wanted. I reminded her that she was the one who had an affair and lied to me. She was the one who decided to end our marriage, not me. Eventually, she accepted defeat and put her things in the car. When she took out the last load, I didn't even wait for her to get to her car, say goodbye. I just slammed the door shut behind her and locked it. Since then, I've spoken with a lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. He told me the evidence I had wasn't completely solid, but I had a good chance it would work in my favor. That was more than enough. Since I found out my wife was lying to me about so many things in her life, I don't know what to believe anymore. I've thought about going to therapy, but for now, I prefer to wait. I think I'll be in a better state of mind when the divorce is finalized, and I'm waiting until then before making any major decisions. Update. For those clamoring for an update, it's finally here. I've been planning to post one for a while, but there were so many developments, one after another, that I never felt it was the right time to tell everything. Well, now that the dust has settled, I feel it's the right time to talk about everything that's happened. First, I was surprised to learn that my wife and her new man were still together. She really saw something in him, I guess. I had to wonder, what did he have that was better than a nice house, a stable income, and loyalty? According to her, he had a good heart. Maybe that was it. Well, we'll see how far that gets her. I found that out when we wanted to serve her with the divorce papers. I asked for her address, and I couldn't believe it when she told me she was still staying in the same motel room where I'd caught them. They really had nowhere else to go. It was so pathetic I might have felt sorry for her, but instead, I just felt secondhand embarrassment. Especially when she called me to ask if we could go to mediation instead of taking it to trial. She had a simple request. She would waive alimony and accept a smaller share of the asset division if she could just keep the house. I laughed in her face. She was not moving into my house with another man. The court would have to drag me out before I allowed something like that. Besides, her plan made no sense. She hadn't rented a new place because she didn't earn much and was supporting a complete deadbeat. There was no way the two of them could afford the mortgage and upkeep on the place where we lived. She told me that she and Marcus, her new man, would get their act together once they had a house, that she would apply for better jobs, and that he was a good man who just needed a chance. I couldn't believe how stupid she was being. She talked like a teenager in love with her first boyfriend. There was no logic or reason in anything she said. There was no way to make Amy see reason, and, to be honest, I didn't care anymore. Either way, I wasn't going to accept the mediation she wanted. My lawyer asked me to think about it seriously. He said it was a very convenient offer for me, but I refused. Maybe I was being emotional too, but I considered it a matter of principle. There was no way I was handing over my house to the man who had taken my wife from me. I would have felt like the biggest fool, with her using my house to get her lover off the streets. I wasn't thrilled about a long legal battle, but I was willing to stand up for what I believed was right. And when we got to court, I understood why she was so insistent on mediation. It wasn't just that she wanted the house, but she knew she had no chance of winning. I don't know how I didn't see it before. They didn't have money to pay rent, so clearly, she didn't have money to hire a good lawyer. I had a divorce lawyer with over 2 decades of experience, while hers looked like he was fresh out of law school. With the evidence of her infidelity and the fact that she had already moved in with another man, if you could even call it that, things didn't go well for her at all. She got to keep some things I didn't really care about, but what really made my day was the fact that she didn't get the house. To me, that was poetic justice. Sure, she got some spousal support, but it wasn't much. They just wanted to make sure she wouldn't end up destitute once the divorce was finalized. Honestly, I didn't care what happened to her after that. She was the one who left me. It shouldn't be my responsibility how her life turns out, especially now that she has another man. After a few months, they managed to get a new place to live. I've never been there, but I know that area of the city. It's the kind of place where the only good thing you can say about it is that it's cheap. But at least they had a place, right? Now they could work on turning their lives around, as Amy said they would. She would get a better paying job, and Marcus would find stability. To no one's surprise, that was just another lie she told herself. Her good-hearted man who just needed a chance was arrested for drug possession. Drug use violated the terms of their lease agreement, and in less than 2 months since they rented, they both ended up getting evicted from their new apartment. I don't know where they've ended up now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went back to renting a room at their favorite motel. A few days after I found out about Marcus's arrest, Amy called me crying. She said she knew we had ended on bad terms, and that she had made a horrible mistake. For a moment, I thought she was about to ask me to forgive her. Somehow, that would have been better than what she actually called to ask me for. She asked if I could help her pay for Marcus's lawyer. I told her straight up that she already had spousal support to cover any needs, and my obligations to her ended there. If her saintly man needed legal help, he could get it from somewhere else. She begged me to be reasonable, but I replied that I was already being more than reasonable just by listening to her. Then I hung up on her. She called me several times after that, but I didn't answer. When it became clear she wasn't going to stop calling me, I blocked her number. The divorce was finalized, and she was out of my life. There was nothing more we needed to talk about. My life is much quieter now without her in it. I can say that much. I was happy while I was married, but she threw all that away on a whim. Still, it's infinitely better to be alone than to be with someone you can't trust. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.